DFS. It is Friday, December 9th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 14 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Small. And Jared, where are you going at cash quarterback on DraftKings this week? Is it going to be cheap or are you paying up?
It's cheap for me. I have two kind of variations of a cash line if I'm still deciding between. It's either going to be Geno Smith or Jared Goff for me. I think they're both really strong plays. Geno a bit more expensive at 6,200. Goff 5,600. We'll have to see about this right shoulder that Geno popped up on the injury report. Limited practice on Thursday. We'll see how that shakes out later today. DK Metcalf added to the injury report on Thursday too. So there's some questions there. I do think Jared Goff, that's kind of where I'm leaning at this point to save the $600. Goff just playing well lately. 69% completion rate, 7.6 yards per attempt over his last 4 games. As we talked about on yesterday's preview podcast, we saw the Lions go pass heavy in terms of pass rate over expected against a Jags defense last week that is, tougher against the run than the pass. The Vikings aren't quite as big of a pass funnel, but they are tougher against the run than the pass. So we could see pretty nice volume from Goff again this week. And this is just kind of the game to attack on the main slate too. Easily the highest over-under of the week, this Lions-Vikings game. So I feel good about Goff at this price tag. He feels pretty safe to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with both of those guys being in contention. I'll be watching Geno Smith's injury. When I saw him pop up, I was quickly searching for news, and I'm gonna hope that the fact that there weren't reports like, Geno hurt his right shoulder in practice today, watch out for this week. I'm going to guess that because of that, it was just a slight tweak. They limited him in that day, and we'll get back to, something close to full today, but we'll certainly be watching that. But either way, even if Geno is good to go, Jared Goff looks like a good play, $5,600. He's also carrying the highest ownership projection at the position for DraftKings in our lineup generator right now. So he does, that doesn't matter for cash. He beats the other 5K guys in floor for me. We've got Ryan Tannehill, Tyler Huntley, Trevor Lawrence because of the foot. I think he would be in contention if he didn't have that injury that he was contending with. Better matchup for Jared Goff than Daniel Jones. But I think the high ownership is going to take Jared Goff out of tournament lineup contention for me here, just because, he is, for one, still Jared Goff. And even though he's been playing well lately, if he had a stinker, we wouldn't be like, where did this come from? I thought he was the perfect quarterback. The other thing is he's still a bit iffy on ceiling. 24.6 DraftKings points last week, but he's had just 3 other games of 20-plus DraftKings points this season. He's reached 27 points once. That was back in week 4 against Seattle. So I'm not saying the ceiling is definitely not there. I'm just not as sure that it's there as I am with some other guys.
Yeah, chalk Jared Goff just seems like a guy we shouldn't be playing in tournaments. So he is tempting. He's obviously an easy stack with Amon-Ra St. who's also still a pretty nice value on this slate. But I'm going to try to stay away from Goff in tournaments at that ownership.
Yeah, and Amon-Ra St. as you mentioned, $7,800 for him. That's still underpriced versus the safety that he brings relative to the other top producers. He's second in our DK dollars per point at the position at wide receiver. Despite that price being decently high, he leads all wide receivers in ownership projection by a wide margin right now, 25% ownership projection for him. So that stack is not sneaking up on anybody for tournament play, but it is an easy stack to start with for cash lineups. And really, Jared, maybe the best place to play Goff this week is in the underdog battle royale, because he's currently sitting 7th in QB ADP. Those, of course, are 6-team drafts that then go into a tournament field. So if it's 6 teams per draft and Goff is 7th in quarterback ADP, that means he's not always getting picked. You're going to have to take Amon-Ra St. very early. He's number 3 in ADP. In that draft format right now, Justin Jefferson is the top overall player. So you're not going to stack Jefferson and St. Brown together, but you could get St. Brown. You could get Goff late. You can add in DJ Chark, Adam Thielen. Those guys are actually tied for 20th in wide receiver ADP. And we're talking a format here where no more than 18 wide receivers can get selected in a given draft. So if you've got a Goff, St. Brown, and then either Chark or Thielen lineup, there probably aren't a whole lot of other duplicates of that in the tourney.
Yeah, the underdog drafts and, the sleeper drafts too, the same concept, are super interesting. Just trying to figure out, how contrarian you want to get, because the rosters are so small that, like, you look at the teams that win these final things, like you basically need like the perfect team, like the top scoring position, the top scoring guy at every position. So you have to ask yourself, what are the odds Goff is, maybe not the top guy, but at least a top 3 quarterback on the main slate? How do those odds compare to the ownership? As you said, he's probably going to be owned in only 25 or something percent of these drafts. So super interesting. I'm looking at my underdog exposure so far. I've done 8 of these drafts so far this week. Don't have any Jared Goff yet, but might mix him in the last few drafts I do this week.
Yeah, I'm certainly not saying draft Jared Goff every time, but if you're looking at him on DK and you're like, if everybody's got him, I don't want him. Here's a place to get him where not everybody has him. If you haven't played on underdog yet, I mean, drafting for me is just a more fun way to play DFS. I would rather draft these teams than just sit there with my salary cap and set a lineup and guess what everybody else is doing. So if you feel the same way and you haven't done these yet, make your first deposit, use promo code DraftSharks. You'll get that first deposit matched up to $100, and then you can just play for free for a while. Win some money. You can play for free forever. We'll get back to DraftKings lineup building now. And on the tourney side, Jared, that shoulder thing for Geno might make him a little bit comfier for tournament play. And his ownership projection right now is lower than I would have guessed. So I really like the Geno Smith plus either of his wide receivers, maybe both in certain builds, plus Noah Fant, who gives you some salary relief on a slate that's going to be tough to fit some top options. So I really like the combo of value and upside and, relatively low ownership rate in the Seattle stack here.
Yeah, definitely like Geno for tournaments. I would double stack them. I'm not sure I'd do the triple stack with both wideouts and Fant, but I think both wideouts or one of them with Fant makes a lot of sense. I like Donta Foreman as the run back on that team. If that game is going to stay close enough where Geno does hit a ceiling, I think it's going to be because Foreman is having a big game on the ground. So I do like that tournament stack. I like Joe Burrow for tournaments. He's coming in with decent ownership, 7%, I think, last I saw. He has 30-plus DK points in 2 of his last 3 games now and 4 times overall this season. So he's consistently shown, the ability to be that tournament-winning quarterback. The Browns haven't been stopping anything lately. They've been bad against the run. They've been bad against the pass, too, though. 23rd in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks. And then my super crazy tournament play of the week, Ryan Tannehill, down at $5,200. The tough thing with Tannehill is, like, who do you stack him with? It looks like Treylon Burks is not going to play. Yeah. I mean, I like a Christian Kirk run back on this team, but just $5,200 for Tannehill. We talked on yesterday's preview show about how Tennessee has kind of shifted to being a more balanced offense over the past 4 or 5 weeks with Derrick Henry struggling, and maybe they go that way again this week. This was the matchup where we saw the Lions and Jared Goff go, pass heavier last week against Jacksonville. Jack's 31st in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. They're 25th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks on the season. So, $5,200 for Tannehill. If you can get 25 points out of him, that might be enough.
Yeah, I don't think I'll get there, but I can understand the idea that one way to play Ryan Tannehill could be him and Derrick Henry. And I know the initial idea is play Ryan Tannehill because it's not really working with Derrick Henry lately. But I don't have the numbers currently in front of me, but huge Derrick Henry games have not necessarily been bad Ryan Tannehill games. In the past, we've seen lots of them getting there together because, one helps drive the other. Either Tennessee jumps out to a lead passing early and hands the ball a lot to Derrick Henry late, or, the defense dealing with Derrick Henry just makes it easier to throw the ball. So, it is tough to pick a pass catcher to go with Tannehill. I feel like you don't really have to. You could just play him naked, as the kids say, and then seriously run back 1 or 2 Jaguars wide receivers on the other side because they're more attractive. I do think that Trevor Lawrence at 5,700 is attractive here as well. The foot injury keeps him out of cash consideration, but the salary is good. He wasn't nearly as bad last week as the fantasy numbers might indicate, dealt with some wide receiver drops. The Detroit D has been playing well lately. So this week we've got him, we've got Christian Kirk, we've got Zay Jones, we've got Evan Ingram, all in single digits in projected ownership. And that's kind of the good thing about the way last week went. And now we've got this matchup that just favors throwing the ball. Tennessee is the 6th best QB scoring matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed, dominating run defense. So opponents are passing at the league's highest rate over expected for the season. And the Jaguars have shown lately that they're not going to force the run. They're happy to go ahead and throw the ball if that's what makes sense. So I really like the upside of the Jacksonville stack here.
Yeah, I like this game in general, which maybe I shouldn't because it has a 41 point over under. But it's the type of game that that over under is going to keep people off it. And as we've said, both these defenses are kind of pass funnels, which could lead to more plays, more points in this game.
Running back, and I think my top guy for cash is another reason to like Joe Burrow in tournaments because Joe Mixon's back. His salary is under 7K. The Pittsburgh game that he left early with that concussion is just the second time all season that he's been in single digits for PPR scoring. And even with that game, he's still fifth among running backs in touches per game on the year. So he should be a very good bet for opportunities for scoring upside. Cleveland's the second best scoring matchup for running backs by our adjusted fantasy points allowed, but he's going to be on a whole lot of rosters this week.
Yes, that's a good point. Burrow kind of gives you the leverage off of Joe Mixon, who's going to be, 20+% owned. But I do like Mixon for cash. I'm not worried about the ownership. Good matchup against the Browns. Bengals 5.5 point home favorites with a 26 point implied total. Head coach Zach Taylor said this week too, in case you were wondering, that Mixon still is their guy. I don't expect much change to the workload split, despite, P. Ryan's two pretty solid games with Mixon out. So I like Mixon for cash. I like Dalvin Cook for cash too. He's just, for a while now, he's been getting a really nice workload. 75+% of Minnesota's offensive snaps in 6 straight games, if you omit that blowout loss to the Cowboys when the Vikings pulled starters late in that game. Cook averaging 17.7 carries and 4.3 targets over those 6 games. And the Lions defense has been better. It's more the pass defense that's improved, that they're still mid-pack against the run in Football Outsiders defensive DVOA over the last 5 weeks.
Fantasy players are funny, wondering if Samaje Perine has done enough to supplant or take work away from Joe Mixon. Like, he had a really good game last week against a soft Chiefs defense. The week before, he had 93 total yards on 21 touches. So, I mean, it was nice, but that's why he's the backup. That's why he was in when Joe Mixon was gone. He's not as good as Joe Mixon. I think there are a bunch of other options you can consider toward the top of our dollars per point rankings in the lineup generator. I want to say I do think that DeAndre Swift is in play here, $5,800. He might seem shaky because he started this week limited with the ankle on the practice report. I'm going to go ahead and play him for cash because he got back to full practice on Thursday. Obviously, we'll watch and see where Friday goes to confirm, but the full practice Thursday tells me that it was more a matter of resting him than, oh no, his ankle is weakened by that workload last week. I could be wrong. It could certainly bite me, but this is where we take chances on that. And, if I'm right in not worrying about the ankle, he got 20 opportunities last week. You're just not getting 20 opportunities from a sub 6K starting back on a home favorite without some question mark. So I'm not too worried about the question mark in this case.
Yeah, Swift is not one of the first guys in my cash lineup, but I think I am going to end up playing him as that third running back in the flex spot. It's just a nice price. We don't even need the 14 carries we got last week. Give us 8 to 10 carries. We really just want the target volume. He has 14 targets over his last 2 games. He's averaging nearly 5 targets per game over the 6 games back from injury, even when he was on a limited snap count in most of those games. And the Vikings have allowed the 6th most running back catches, the 2nd most running back receiving yards, and a lot of that has come recently. They gave up the big receiving game to Tony Pollard, 109 yards and 2 touchdowns for Pollard in that blowout win for the Cowboys. Ramondre Stevenson caught 9 passes against them on Thanksgiving. Zonovan Knight and Ty Johnson combined for 11 catches against Minnesota last week. So, I think you're basically just playing Swift for that pass catching production. Anything he gives you on the ground is kind of a bonus.
Mm-hmm. On the tourney side, Mixon and Swift are both tracking for higher ownership than I would like here. I'm a little bit more willing to stick with Mixon through that than I am Swift because there is risk. There's some risk that ankle is tweaked. There's just some risk that he doesn't succeed on the ground or gives the touchdowns to Jamal Williams. So I lean away from him at higher ownership here. What do you like for tournament running back?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have a rule where I play Tony Pollard or Zeke Elliott in every tournament lineup I make this week. I think one of them is going to have a big game, if not both of them. Dallas 17.5 point home favorites with a 30.75 point implied total against the Texans. Zeke, by the way, he has 16 plus DraftKings points in 4 straight games now. He hasn't topped 18.1 all season, so I guess that's kind of the argument against him, is he hasn't had that blow up game yet. But he hasn't hit the 100-yard bonus yet, which has a big part to do with that. So I think he could definitely get there this week. So I like the Cowboys backs. Then I like Miles Sanders as a tournament play this week too. $6,200. He's had 3 tough matchups among his last 4: Washington, Indianapolis, and Tennessee. The other game was the Packers. That was at a Sunday night game. It wasn't on the main slate. It was a primetime game. He had 143 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game for 34 DraftKings points. I think that's the type of upside he has in this matchup against the Giants. The Giants aren't good against the run over the pass, so the Eagles could attack them either way. But I think they're definitely going to shift more towards the run than we saw in that game against Tennessee last week.
Yeah, Sanders is averaging something like 5.3 yards per carry in his career against the Giants. And that's a span that has included Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams, the D lineman for the Giants, the entire time. So it's been a positive matchup for him. I like the Dallas guys as well. I've got them down. I think it's not crazy to play both of them in the same lineup, considering the way Dallas has been running and the way Houston matches up. Dallas is among the run heaviest offenses in the league versus expectation, both for the season and recently. And Houston is driving the most rushing over expectation. So we've got a team that wants to give the ball to the running backs plenty. We've got a defense that is encouraging teams to give it to the running backs plenty. We also have twice in the past 3 games that both of these guys topped 17 PPR points together in the same game. So we don't have to say this is what could happen. We've seen it. They can both deliver in the same game, and there aren't going to be a whole lot of both Dallas running backs lineups out there. So I'm not saying this is your primary tournament build, but I wouldn't mind doing it a few times.
Yeah, I think it's viable. I mean, 17 points out of both guys isn't enough to win a tournament, but if you can get, I think you probably need like 50 combined between them, which it is possible in this matchup, I think.
Yeah, and when I say over 17 points for both of them, it's been one of them scoring more than 20, like 25 plus, and the other one scoring 17 or 18. So, we'll see what happens in this ultimate matchup against Houston. For wide receiver, what do you like for cash?
Yeah, so Chris Godwin and Christian Kirk are my first 2 guys in. I think they're both just excellent target bets for the price tag. Godwin, $6,700. He's averaging 11 targets over his last 5 games, and it's not like he's had like one huge spike target week and the rest have been kind of low. He has 8+ targets in all 5 of those games. The Niners are just 25th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers, and they're actually a better matchup for slot receivers than outside receivers. Godwin, of course, 66% of his snaps in the slot this season, so it's a good individual matchup for him. And then Christian Kirk, 8 targets last week. He has 8+ targets in 4 straight games now, 7+ targets in 6 straight games. And as we've said, this should be a pass-heavy game from Jacksonville against this Titans defense. Tennessee, dead last in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers.
Mm-hmm. I like Zay Jones on the other side of that one, $4,700 salary for him on DK this week. And the silver lining for him individually from that bad week 13 game where he dropped 3 passes, it brought his salary back down $200 after 3 straight weeks of increase on that front. His targets, meanwhile, over the past 3 games have gone 10, 14, 7. He's 13th among all wide receivers in target share over the past 4 weeks. We'll watch Trevor Lawrence, but he says he's going to play through the foot injury. So even if you don't feel comfortable betting on Trevor Lawrence in lineups, I think that's enough to make Zay Jones a pretty good value at his salary. And, we already mentioned Tennessee, a big time pass funnel matchup. So the volume should be there.
Yep. Yeah, you definitely need Lawrence to play Kirk or Zay Jones, I think, in cash. So keep an eye on that. The 2 other guys I'm considering, again, I'm kind of working with 2 different cash lineups at this point. But Garrett Wilson, I still think is in play at $5,900. 26% target share from Mike White over the past 2 weeks. He went for 8 catches and 92 yards against the Bills a few weeks ago with Zach Wilson at quarterback. Buffalo just 18th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. They're just 18th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers on the season. So it's a fine matchup for Garrett Wilson. I think he's going to continue to get the volume. And then if I have to go with a cheap wide receiver in that 3rd spot, I do think Zay Jones is in play. I also don't mind Michael Gallup at $4,600. I kind of want some exposure to this Cowboys offense in my cash game lineup. They have easily the highest implied total on the main slate. Gallup just $4,600. He has a 25% target share over the past 2 weeks, 15 total targets over that span. I think, he's looked healthy, finally coming off that ACL, which I think makes sense with the timeline. He's about 9 months removed from it, 10 months removed from it now. So he should start, looking closer to 100%.
Yeah, I think you're going to need some salary relief somewhere. Obviously, you look at Michael Gallup and you're like, I don't know how many targets he's going to get. He might let you down. That might be the case, but you got to pay down somewhere. We'll talk about tight ends soon, but let's say you're starting out with the Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson stack, whether it's cash or tournament, you got to pay down somewhere. What do you think about ultimately paying down for Philip Dorsett or Kendall Hinton? 3K, 3,400 for the two of them. Each of those guys could lead their offenses in pass routes this week. You're obviously not expecting anything big, and I'm not sure I'd do it for tournament purposes because I don't think the upside's there for either guy. But for cash, you're basically just hoping for 3 to 4 catches and some decent yardage.
Yeah, they're not going to make my cash line. I think they're okay. I think they're in play for tournaments, actually, just for what they let you do elsewhere. If you can get 15 points out of a 3K wide receiver, I think Chris Moore is the other guy in that mix. He's going to be the other starting wide receiver for Houston with Nico Collins and Brandon Cooks out. So I think they're definitely worth considering. Mess around with the lineup, see what they let you fit in.
Mm-hmm. On the tournament side, what else do you like at wide receiver?
Yeah, so Jamar Chase at $7,900 is our top dollars per point value at wide receiver, and he's coming in at just 15% projected ownership. So if that ownership holds in that range, I'm definitely going to be playing a lot of Chase in tournaments. We know about the upside he has. Tyler Lockett, I like at $6,500, pretty low ownership on him. He's actually the only wide receiver with a 99.9 matchup advantage according to Pro Football Focus this week. They kind of look at where Lockett lines up and the corners he's going to face on the Panthers. He has the best matchup of the week according to PFF. Deebo Samuel, $6,100, 4% projected ownership. I'm not saying that the move to Purdy's good news for Deebo, but it might help his target volume if he's running those shorter, higher percentage routes. And I do also think there's a chance his rushing role grows if San Francisco does decide to go run heavier with Purdy under center. So Deebo at that price tag at 4% ownership, I think he's worth a shot in tourneys.
I agree. I have Jaguars and Seahawks wide receivers down here. We talked about Trevor Lawrence. We talked about Geno Smith. Even if you're not playing either of those quarterbacks, though, I think both of those sets of wide receivers look like they're going to go under-owned by the current ownership projections in our lineup generator. So I would tap into those wide receiver cores, even if you're not using the wideouts. And then in kind of the same vein as Deebo Samuel, Juju Smith-Schuster at $5,600, just 3% projected ownership right now. Before his concussion, he had a 3-game stretch that went 5 for 113 and a touchdown, 7 for 124 and a touchdown, 10 for 88. He was back last week to leading Chiefs wide receivers in routes. I'm not betting on an ultimate Patrick Mahomes ceiling game this week, but it is still Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback. Juju is the lead wide receiver for Patrick Mahomes. So this is an affordable way to make a slight bet on Patrick Mahomes in a week where you might not want to necessarily bet on the full ceiling game for the Chiefs QB.
I like it. And you can, make a little mini stack with Juju and Jerry Jeudy or Juju and Kendall Hinton.
I think I'd rather just play the one piece and stay away from the Broncos in a tournament lineup.
That's fine. I do think a Broncos wide receiver hitting, though, helps Juju's ceiling. If Denver can actually score and keep the Chiefs passing, that helps Juju.
Yeah, I just don't think that's possible. Tight end for cash. This is where I might play a Bronco, actually, Jared. Greg Dulcich, $3,400. Nice combo of salary, opportunity, and matchup where they're heavy underdogs here. He finally got the targets last week, so we can at least for a week here not say, oh yeah, he's running the routes, the targets are going to come at some point. They finally came, and it probably didn't hurt that Cortland Sutton left early and Jerry Jeudy was not all the way back. He did play, but it was limited. He was third among wide receivers in routes for that game. Is still limited in practice this week. So, there's still a path for Dulcich to get the target bump. And most importantly, the salary is really nice, can give you relief elsewhere.
Yes, for me in cash, it's either Dulcich or it's Chigoziem Okonkwo. He's $2,700. I mean, he gives you a significant savings from Dulcich even. Season high route rate for Chig last week at 56%. He has 5 targets in 2 straight games now. He's actually been targeted on 24% of his routes this season, which is a really strong number for a tight end. So the Titans have been looking to get him the ball when he's out there, and they should be. He might be, especially with Burks out this week, he is their most explosive pass catcher. He's averaging 18.3 yards per catch this season. It's on a small sample, obviously, but and the Jags are 31st in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ranking. So I think Chig is in play at that price tag for cash and tournaments.
I agree with that. I think Jordan Akins is the other guy in the same category, 2,800 against the Cowboys. Not a great matchup, but he's seen 11 targets over the past 2 games. I think, like I said, that salary puts him in play for the same reasons that you say for Chigakonkwo, where you're not expecting a whole lot, but you get the salary relief. You get somebody who's been involved and a team that's likely to fall behind. I'm not playing Greg Dulcich in a tourney lineup because his ownership projection right now is almost double anybody else at tight end. And Denver just obviously that part scares me away, and Denver doesn't have the ceiling potential where I'm like, yeah, but if a third of the field has Dulcich and he scores 2 touchdowns, then I'm in trouble. That's not within the range of outcomes. I don't think that Russell Wilson's capable currently of throwing 2 touchdowns in a single game. So instead of Dulcich, if I'm looking in the same range, I like Evan Ingram at 3,300, a much lower ownership against Tennessee, or Noah Fant at 3,100 against Carolina. Certainly, if I'm playing either of those quarterbacks, that further influences it. But I think they're in play even if you're not playing either of those quarterbacks. It doesn't hurt Fant that Will Dissly, even though he returned to practice Thursday with the calf injury, was still limited for that one.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Dulcich is an easy fade in tournaments of that ownership. Okonkwo coming in at just 6% projected owned, so I think he's definitely an option. I do like Ingram. I do like Fant. I think, as always, you got to decide what you want to do with Travis Kelce. And I think Mark Andrews. I like Andrews this week. So Kelsey's coming in at 11% projected ownership at $7,600. I still think he's a fine play. It's always a challenge to fit him in. Mark Andrews, $6,500, 4% projected ownership. He averaged 11 targets on a 31% target share in Tyler Huntley's 5 games last season, 8.6 catches, 100 yards per game in those 5 games with Huntley. Again, I'm not saying it's a quarterback upgrade for Andrews, but Huntley obviously, leans on Mark Andrews, and that's going to continue because Baltimore's wide receiver core is even worse now than it was last season. So I think Andrews at the ownership is a nice tournament play this week.
I agree. It doesn't have to be a QB upgrade. All you need for Mark Andrews is for people to be off him and his quarterback not to be the worst thing in the world. And then the upside's there. And I like Mark Andrews as a tournament play over Travis Kelce. Obviously, Travis Kelce's capable of going off in any given game. I would lean away from him this week, though, because Kansas City has been passing the ball less lately, as we talked about on the Thursday preview pod. Still over 60-40 in favor of the pass, but they have been down quite a bit, 7 percentage points in pass rate over the past 4 games versus the previous 8. And within those 2 spans, Travis Kelce has seen his receptions per game fall by 2 per game. So, it's not a reason to worry about Travis Kelce overall, but it does kind of lower that. Yeah, but Travis Kelce is going to go off this week and I'm scared to not have him.
Yeah, I'm just looking through his box score here. I mean, his truly massive games, he's had 2 games over 33 DK points. Those came in 30-27 win over the Chargers and the 30-29 win over the Raiders. So he has needed, the shootout games to put up the games where you had to have Kelce to have a chance to win a tournament.
Yeah, and that was the other point that I forgot to bring up here is that I don't think that Denver's going to hang with them. I think this is going to be a game where Kansas City's like, oh, we can run the ball even more in this one. I mean, they ran the ball a lot last week in a loss to Cincinnati, so I wouldn't be shocked at all if they even lean a little bit further in that direction this week.
Agreed.
On defense, what do you like, Jared?
I think in cash, I'm playing the Jets at $2,500. They scored 10 DK points against the Bills back in week 9, and the Bills in 4 games since have turned it over 6 times in that span. They've allowed 9 sacks. So, it hasn't really been that poor of a matchup for fantasy defenses. And again, the Jets are a quality defense. They, held the Bills to 17 points and won that game back in week 9. So I think they're a decent play at the price for cash.
I agree. They sacked Josh Allen 5 times in that meeting. They picked him twice. So it's not like they just got lucky with 1 touchdown. It was a legitimately good defensive game. And, is there a risk that the Bills score 30 points? Of course, but that's why it's a $2,500 defense. So you pay for that. The Bills, it's also worth noting that Josh Allen masks it quite a bit from everybody but Adam Krautwurst, at least. But the talent on that Bills offense is really not very good outside of Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, it's not as bad as Adam says it is, but
I don't mean to say
probably
it's
league
bad.
average. It's league average, I think.
Like relative to what they score, like you look at the offense and you're like, that offense is amazing. But if you break it down piece by piece, you're like, Josh Allen's really good. Stephon Diggs is really good. The rest of those guys they're some solid ones.
Yep. Agreed.
I think otherwise the Steelers 2,800 against Tyler Huntley is interesting. 5 interceptions, 4 fumbles in Tyler Huntley's limited career as a starter. Buccaneers 2,900 against Brock Purdy. I mean, the argument there is just we've never seen Brock Purdy start a game yet. He was Mr. Irrelevant in the draft this year, so he's probably not amazing. So there's some upside.
Yes, I like the Bucs in tournaments at 8% projected ownership. The Jets coming in with just 2% projected ownership. So I will definitely be playing them in tournaments. And then you have to decide what you're going to do with the Cowboys. They're $3,800. They're coming in at 13% projected ownership. I can sit here and say that they're a decent tournament play. I can guarantee you when I actually sit down to make tournament lineups, I will not get up to the Cowboys at that price tag and at that ownership. You just have to. You're just fading a defensive touchdown. If they just don't score a defensive touchdown, they're going to be a good fade in tournament. So that's going to be my lean.
Mm-hmm. But there's certainly a defense well set up to score touchdowns because they have playmakers. So yeah, it's one that's scary to fade. I think it's scarier to full fade the Cowboys defense than it is to full fade Travis Kelce this week.
I guess. I'm just looking through the Cowboys game logs too. They have like 4 massive games of 20 plus DK points this season. So I don't know. Maybe I'll try to get him in one of my lineups at least.
Well, there you go. That'll do it. And that's going to do it for the Week 14 DraftKings podcast. You can head to draftsharks.com now to play around with our lineup generator, build your own lineups for DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo. You can also find Jared's articles highlighting top picks for cash and tournament lineups on DraftKings this week. If you're on stream, stick around. We're going to do the FanDuel show right after a quick break. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, December 9th here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 14 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, Jared Smollett. Jared, I think that for quarterback in cash on FanDuel, I'm going to go ahead and pay up this week rather than going cheap. What about you?
Oh, me too, always. And our dollars per point rankings would tell you same. Jalen Hurts checking in right now as a strong value at $8,700. I mean, he's just been Hurts has fallen short of 20 FanDuel points just twice all season. Giants aren't good against the run; they're not good against the pass. So Hurts can score fantasy points both ways.
Yeah, they're a neutral matchup for quarterbacks. They're mid-pack and adjusted fantasy points allowed. So, it's just a matchup that doesn't affect it either way. So it's just Jalen Hurts versus not playing Jalen Hurts. And as you just said, it's been a play Jalen Hurts kind of year. Over 29 FanDuel points in 2 straight games as well, and over 24 in 3 straight. So not only is he fairly safe, but a good chance that he really dominates this matchup. If salary really matters, I think Geno Smith is in play, 7,700 if the shoulder is good to go. Jared Goff, 7,100 certainly in play here. Minnesota's a bottom third QB defense. They've allowed the 5th most quarterback points for the year. And just over the past 2 weeks, 360 plus yards to Mike White and Mac Jones. So plenty of upside to Goff.
Yeah, pricing feels a bit tighter on FanDuel this week too. So, and not that you can't play Hurts in cash, it's definitely possible. But I do think going down to Goff and saving the $1,600 might be worth it, depending on what it helps you get. I do like Geno and Goff for tournaments. I think Goff's a better play in tournaments on FanDuel here. He's not as good of a value, but he's also coming in at just 9% projected ownership. That's a bit easier to swallow than the 15% on DraftKings. So I do like Goff. He's been playing well. This is obviously the game to attack this week. The Lions have the 2nd highest implied total on the main slate behind only the Cowboys.
Yeah, certainly still higher than usual projected ownership for Goff, but just tied for 3rd among quarterbacks, as opposed to being higher on DK, as you said. He's tied with Kirk Cousins and Joe Burrow as well, so plenty of potential for those guys to be ahead of him and behind Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts in the double-digit range. So yeah, I like Jared Goff. The Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown stack is not going to be all that sneaky. Justin Jefferson's not going to sneak up on anybody, but there's enough to play with in that matchup. You got DJ Chark, you got Adam Thielen, some tight ends. So there's stuff to work with. I probably like Geno Smith and his wide receivers a bit more because of the lower ownership projections on those guys. We'll see if that changes into the weekend as we find out more about Geno Smith's shoulder. But plenty of upside there as well. I think among the expensive guys, I like Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow versus the others. The Bengals are third in pass rate over expected over the past 4 weeks. And Joe Mixon's going to be absorbing a whole lot of ownership, a lot more than the Bengals passing game pieces. So it's not only betting on the upside of Joe Burrow and his wideouts, but also leveraging versus Joe Mixon teams.
Yeah, good call on Burrow. I have some interest in Patrick Mahomes because he's 7% projected owner. I know we don't expect Denver to push the Chiefs in this game, but I mean, Mahomes could throw for 260 yards and throw 4 touchdowns. And Denver, by the way, 29th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. They opened the season as this run funnel defense. They've kind of flopped over the past 5 weeks. They've been tougher against the run in the past. So maybe at least to open the game, the Chiefs do come out throwing more than they have over the past few weeks.
Jared, if you want to find somewhere where Geno Smith and Jared Goff are truly undervalued, I would recommend trying some sleeper daily drafts. And I tested this just before the show. I entered one of their $1 drafts just to make sure that this was the case. And like Geno Smith and Jared Goff are down to the point where they're not getting drafted in every draft. It's 8-team drafts on there. So we've got, I believe it was 9 or 10 quarterbacks going ahead of them. It includes the Sunday night slate. So that's even a little bit more players added in. It's also a good place to get Amon-Ra St. Brown right now. I mean, he's going to be highly owned in these salary cap contests. He's only the number 14 overall player on the sleeper draft board. That's a full PPR format. So he was my second pick in the draft. I think I picked 6th in that draft. So I got, somebody in the first round, which I can't remember right now, because I was like, oh, let Amon-Ra St. Brown get to me, and we'll just mess around with whoever I took before him. But good values there. Plus, you spend $1 to draft a team. Then you decide whether you like the lineup. You decide whether you want to enter it into more contests to try to win more off of it. Or, maybe you screwed it up at the end. You're like, I don't like this team as much as I thought I was going to. It's $1. You can see if it wins anything against that group. And then you can go draft another team and see if you can do better that time.
Yeah, really cool format. And, if Amon-Ra St. Brown's the 14th receiver, I mean, I love the underdog drafts. It
14th
like
player overall.
14th player, yeah. I love the underdog drafts. It seems like the competition might be a little weaker on sleeper right now if St. Brown's dropping that far. So, give both a shot for sure.
Absolutely, especially when you consider that it's full PPR versus half PPR. So if you haven't tried the sleeper drafts yet, I recommend going ahead and depositing some money. Enter promo code DraftSharks. You'll get that deposit matched in full. Play with some free money. Try it out. We got 4 weeks left in the season after this one. We got 5 weeks left for DFS purposes, Jared. We're so focused on redraft that we think it ends in week 17, but this stuff goes through week 18. So you got lots of time to play with it, especially if maybe your redraft teams aren't going so well and you need a reason to care about these final few games.
We got the playoffs too. We got like 2 more months of this.
That's right. On to running back for week 14 specifically. On the cash side, we've only got 2 running backs cheaper than $8K among our top 8 in dollars per point. What do you think about this position for cash on FanDuel?
Yeah, that's where I was saying where, pricing feels tight. There's not a ton of cheap plays to love on FanDuel this week. I'm going to get Christian McCaffrey in my cash game lineup. I think he should be the most expensive running back on the slate. He's not. He does come in as our top dollars per point value by a pretty significant margin. He's $8,500 on FanDuel. He played 82% of the offensive snaps last week. That was his highest rate since joining the 49ers. And he had 27 opportunities in that game, 17 carries, 10 targets. And I think the Niners are going to continue to lean on McCaffrey now that it's Brock Purdy under center.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they have much of a choice. And he's got the shortest ADOT among those main pass catchers for them. So he'll be the most attractive option for this new quarterback. And I think you can get some salary relief by playing him alongside one of those 2 lower salary running backs that I referred to. DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard are the guys among our top 8 in FanDuel dollars per point. The guys in that range who are less than $8,000 in FanDuel salary. I think they're both in play. Tony Pollard's probably safer because he's not coming in with an ankle injury. He's also been continuing to touch the ball a lot, 6th among running backs in touches per game over the past 5 weeks. That, of course, included some missed time for Zeke Elliott, but even the past 2 weeks, 20 and 15 opportunities still for Tony Pollard. They get the matchup against Houston, which has been encouraging opponents to run the ball all season. So we should get lots of backfield touches for Dallas.
Yeah, Pollard's my second guy in for cash lineups. I want some exposure to this Cowboys offense, and I think Pollard's the best way to get it on FanDuel.
I think a big no thanks to me for 9K Derrick Henry this week. The matchup isn't scary, but the way that he's been producing the past 4 weeks sure is, especially at that salary.
The Sailor, yeah, for cash, and then for on the tournament side, I mean, he's 16% projected ownership, so people are still going to play him evidently, despite the fact that he really has been bad for the past month now. So, yeah, always scary to fade Henry. Like it's a spot on paper where he could blow up, but again, it's concerning the way he's played and even how Tennessee's used him over the past 4 or 5 games now.
And I honestly, I'm not even scared to fade him this week because the past 4 weeks have been really bad against middling to poor run defenses. And Jacksonville has been playing the run tougher than the pass. So,
famous last words though.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like if we get to Sunday night and he has 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, I can't be like, where did that come from? But I would go ahead and bet strongly against him being a slate breaker right now.
Yeah. I think he's a good fade at the price and ownership,
especially with plenty of guys in that 8K range that makes sense. And also the 7Ks are interesting, especially when you get over to the tournament side. We've got Miles Sanders at 7,100. We've got Isaiah Pacheco at 7,300. I think both Panthers running backs are interesting depending on how things are with Deontay Foreman's foot going into that game. He did return to practice Thursday. So at 6,900, he makes a lot of sense against Seattle. But if he's out for some reason, Chuba Hubbard 5,500 is interesting as well, and a matchup that really favors Carolina running the ball.
Yeah, I have Foreman down here as a play. We'll have to see about the foot. Seattle dead last in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. And Foreman's just been the quintessential GPP play. He has games of 19 and 32 FanDuel points over his last 5. He also has games of 3 and 2 FanDuel points over that span. But that's kind of the range you want in tournaments. I think Zeke Elliott is an interesting tournament play. He's $500 more expensive than Tony Pollard on FanDuel. Like, how many people are going to click Zeke Elliott for more than Tony Pollard? We have him at 8% projected ownership right now. I would bet he comes in even lower than that because of that price discrepancy. And Zeke honestly is the better bet for a multi-touchdown game because Dallas is still going to him over Pollard in most cases near the goal line.
You know who's clicking on him at 500 more than Tony Pollard is Jerry Jones.
Yeah, for sure.
In the expensive RB range, I want to highlight Nick Chubb. It's easy to make the case against him because the offense was really bad last week in spite of the big win over Houston. I think that should only further motivate Nick Chubb carries in this game. He did have 23 in the first matchup with Cincinnati, which they won. 101 yards on the ground, scored twice. Bengals opponents have the 5th highest rushing rate over expected for the season. So I think we should get plenty of Nick Chubb carries this week, unless Cincinnati jumps out to a lead. And, that's just a risk that I'm willing to take for a tournament lineup when I'm looking for, an under-owned stud running back to toss in my lineup.
Yeah, 4% Nick Chubb is always a nice tournament play. I like Dalvin Cook for tournaments up there at $8,700. He's leveraged off Kirk Cousins, who's coming in as the 3rd highest projected quarterback in terms of owned rate. And based on the numbers, you want to attack the Lions defense on the ground lately. They're 3rd in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks, 18th against the run. And Cook has been getting for a while now has been getting workhorse usage in terms of both snap rate and touches. So I think he's a really good play, hoping that the Vikings touchdowns come on the ground on Sunday.
I was really hoping that Isaiah Pacheco was going to be sneakier this week, but he's tied with Miles Sanders. Not too high in ownership rate. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, tied for 7th in ownership rate. So it's not a level that makes you say, I forget about him, but I was really hoping he was going to be a sneakier Chiefs play this week.
Yeah. Chiefs don't sneak by people.
That's fair. But Miles Sanders at the same level, plenty of upside there. DeAndre Swift, a little bit sneakier on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. He's just short of those guys in ownership projection. Obviously, we mention these numbers a lot. You don't want to overweight them because they are just projections, could be very different. But if DeAndre Swift is 9th among running backs in that category, I think he makes plenty of sense this week.
Yeah, I agree.
Wide receiver for cash. The Seattle wide receivers look very good again. Even if you don't play Geno Smith. What do you think, Jared?
Yeah, I agree. And they're both coming in with low ownership, which I can't really figure out. DK Metcalf, 6%, Tyler Lockett, 5%. I do think they're both in play for cash. I think they're excellent tournament plays at that ownership. It's kind of the same case at wide receiver as it is at running back on FanDuel, where it's the studs that we have as the best values. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Steph Diggs, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those are our top 5 values at the position. That's where it is kind of a challenging week trying to find, figure out which of those high priced guys to play and then which value guys to play. I do think Christian Kirk and Chris Godwin in the mid sevens are nice values. Kirk is $7,600, Godwin $7,500. Kirk has 8+ targets in 4 straight games, 7+ targets in 6 straight games. He gets the Titans, who are dead last in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers on Sunday. So assuming Trevor Lawrence plays, I think Kirk's a safe cash bet. And then Chris Godwin, 11 targets per game over his last 5. This matchup against the Niners isn't that tough for wide receivers, and particularly slot wide receivers, which is where Godwin has played about 2/3 of his snaps this season.
We're going to have to pay down somewhere if we want to play Jalen Hurts and good running backs and good wide receivers. So I think some cheaper wide receivers to play here. Tyler Boyd at 5,900, 4 catches for 60 last week, dropped what would have been a long touchdown, which should have been an easy long touchdown. Hayden Hurst is out. Tyler Boyd already hit 90% routes last week in Jamar Chase's return. Hayden Hurst leaving that game early probably helped. Him being out this week should help that aspect as well. Juju Smith-Schuster, 6,600, I think makes plenty of sense. The targets weren't there last week, but did lead Chiefs wideouts in route rate. I would say Jerry Jeudy's in play, but the ankle is just not safe enough. He, returned last week, but was still limited. So I'd stay away from that and instead play Zay Jones, 6,300. I think Darius Slayton's got a bad matchup at 6,300, but when you factor in how likely he is to get targets, he's okay at that price. DJ Chark, 5,700. All of these guys have questions that you can bring up with them, but that's why they're down in the mid 6 to below range.
Yes. But yeah, Boyd at 5,900 and then Michael Gallup at 6K are the 2 cheap wide receivers I'm looking at. Gallup's just looked healthier the past couple of weeks. He has 15 targets over the last 2 games. So yeah, Jeudy, he was a guy early in the week. I was like, I'm going to play Jeudy in DFS this week with Cortland Sutton out, but Jeudy has been limited in practice the first 2 days this week. If he's full go today and then not listed on the final injury report, I'm not sure I'd get to him in cash, but I think at least as a tournament play, he'd be interesting.
Yeah, I still don't think I'll get there, but I can get the case for it. I think that whole cheap group of wideouts is easier to tap here where you don't have to, bet on floor. DJ Chark, especially at $5,700 in that marquee matchup this week, which still seems funny to say for Lions Vikings, but he has been good the past 2 weeks in opportunities. It's a good salary offset at 5,700. It's also a good entry point to that game. You can either play him by himself just for that salary relief. You can play him in a Goff stack to get it, a little bit sneakier than the starting point of Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, or you can just play Chark and Justin Jefferson as a little mini stack from that game. So it's a good way to not only get into that game, but different ways to play that game if you don't want to play those quarterbacks, especially.
Yep, I like Chark. We're talking tournaments though, right? I wouldn't play him in cash.
Right.
Yep.
What else do you like for tournaments?
So again, both Seahawks wide receivers. And I actually prefer DK Metcalf. He's kind of separated from Lockett in terms of targets over the last 5 games. Metcalf averaging 9.6 targets over his last 5. He's 7th among all wide receivers in expected fantasy points over that span. So the usage has been really strong. We'll see about his hip issue that landed him on the injury report on Thursday. But again, Metcalf at 6%, Lockett at 5%. I mean, again, to me, I love when I get cash plays that are coming in with low projected ownership. To me, those are the easiest and the best tournament plays.
Absolutely. And I think Garrett Wilson and Deebo Samuel are in similar range. 7,200 for Garrett Wilson, 7,100 for Deebo Samuel, and they both look like they're going to go under-owned. We've got a 9% projected roster rate for Garrett Wilson, 6% for Deebo Samuel. And I mean, really the argument obviously for both of them is that they're both the number 1 wide receivers for their teams. Certainly there are questions about quarterbacks. The matchups aren't amazing. For Deebo though, it's a bottom half wide receiver scoring matchup in the Bucs. So the only question for him is the quarterback, and the quarterback might be a slight plus for him in that it makes him more attractive as a short range target than Brandon Ayuk. So it could help his target counts. And then Garrett Wilson is just Garrett Wilson, and the Bills are a better defense than either the Bears or the Vikings, but they're not a shutdown pass defense right now.
Yeah, definitely like Deebo, especially among those two. And Juju Smith-Schuster, I'll mention again. You mentioned him, you talked about him on the DraftKings show, but the production did not rebound last week, but the playing time did. He was back up to an 81% route rate, and it seems like people aren't noticing because he's coming in at just 3% projected ownership.
Yeah, because it just still looks like a crowded situation, which it is. He's not a lock to get the targets, but we've seen him get there, and Patrick Mahomes has been telling us all year it's going to be different guys every week, so it could be a juju week. For cash at tight end, Jared, we got Travis Kelce leading the dollars per point at an $8,000 FanDuel salary. I don't think he's affordable for cash with the running back and wide receiver pricing we've been talking about.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to play Pat Freiermuth in cash. I think $5,800. He has just 9 targets over his last 2 games. His route rate was actually down last week, so slightly concerning. But I mean, he had 7+ targets in 7 of his 8 healthy games prior to these last 2. And Baltimore, according to both adjusted fantasy points allowed and Football Outsiders DVOA, is weaker in tight end coverage than they are against wide receivers. So it definitely could be a game that the Steelers feature Freiermuth in the passing game.
Yep, I like Freiermuth at $5,800. I like Greg Dulcich at $400 cheaper. Evan Ingram is even $300 below Greg Dulcich. So really, you can play with that group to see what you need to fit other things in your lineup. And then if there's money left over, Dalton Schultz at $6,200 against the Texans is a not too expensive way to get some Cowboys exposure here. On the tournament side, I'm still not paying up for Kelce for the reasons I've talked about before. The Chiefs, I don't think that they're going to need a Mahomes blow-up game here. And when you consider how much you have to pay for Travis Kelce versus everything else on the slate, you really need a Mahomes blow-up game for it to make sense. So instead, I'm going to save salary here, play around with the guys that we mentioned on the cash side, but also throw in Noah Fant at $5,200, especially in a lineup with Geno Smith and one of his wideouts.
Yeah, I'll probably play some Kelce on FanDuel. I actually like Mark Andrews better though, as the elite tight end to target. He's $6,800, so you're saving $1,200 from Travis Kelce, and Mark Andrews coming in at half the projected ownership, just 6% for Mark Andrews. And he's honestly been disappointing, relatively disappointing to what you're paying for him on these DFS sites lately. But he averaged 11 targets, 8.6 catches, and 100 yards per game in Tyler Huntley's 5 games last year. 31% target share in those games for Mark Andrews. So if we can get anything close to that type of volume, I definitely think he has a chance to lead this slate in points among tight ends.
Mm-hmm. And on the other side of that Seattle matchup that I just mentioned is the Panthers, of course. We talked about it on the DK show, but we've got run back options in the backfield for Carolina. There's big upside to Deontay Foreman. But if you also just want to bet on a Seattle blowout here, DJ Moore is $6,900 is an interesting run back in that scenario.
Tell me what to do with George Kittle. Do I have to play him again?
I definitely don't think you have to play him this week against the Bucs.
He's $5,900 now, and he's 2% projected owned.
Yeah, you can. I wouldn't feel I have to, though.
I'm not going to play him, and he's going to have a blow-up kill game, and I'm going to be really upset.
I have a hard time believing that we get a blow-up Kittle game this week. Yeah. Just the targets aren't there. I mean,
the routes have been though.
But you can't ever say something like that can't happen. But there's just no signal that that's coming. Like even his blow up game this season relatively was a 4-catch, 84-yard, 2-touchdown. Like that's not I didn't have him, so I'm losing this week kind of game.
Yeah. I think he will have at least one more big game the rest of the way. This doesn't seem like a likely spot for it. I mean, this game has a 37-point over under. It just doesn't seem like it's going to turn into a shootout. So I'm not going to play him. So, take that for what you will.
I will say that the Bucs could be without both starting safeties again, which would help George Kittle's area of the field. Devin White remains a very shaky coverage player. So I don't know, there's some room for the upside again. Somebody you can play. I wouldn't feel like I'm screwing this week up if I didn't get Kittle into lineups.
Yeah, I mean, he's relatively cheap and he's 2% projected owned. So I think that's the tournament case for him.
Yes. Defense, Steelers 3,800 against Tyler Huntley seems like a good place to start here. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. You could also just say screw it and play the Lions for $3,100. We've talked about they've been better in real life lately, and in fantasy they have their last 5 games in terms of FanDuel points 11, 10, 11, 5, and 5. I mean, if you can get even 5 points out of them for $3,100, that's a nice playing cash.
I agree. I have them down as well. And those double-digit matchups came against the Giants, Bears, and Packers. So I would say worse offenses than the Vikings, but the Vikings are a neutral matchup for team defenses on the season with a slight lean toward positive by the FanDuel numbers. So I agree that that's a good play, especially for the salary relief this week to try to fit other things in your lineup.
Yep.
Now, if we get here and there is money left over, Ravens 4,100 against Kenny Pickett are interesting. The Chiefs 4,500, tough to get to, but if it works, if the money's sitting there in certain builds, I think them against the Broncos is plenty of upside.
Yeah, for sure. The Ravens are the one I like. They're actually our third best value at defense, and they're coming in at just 6% projected ownership. The Ravens have been one of the best defenses in the NFL recently, and the Steelers' offense just has not been good all year.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to do it for the Week 14 FanDuel podcast. You can head over to DraftSharks.com now to play around in the lineup generator, build your own lineups for FanDuel, DraftKings, and Yahoo for this week. You can also find Kevin's articles highlighting top picks for cash and GPP entries on FanDuel. And if you want to try out the drafts that we've been talking about on Underdog or on Sleeper, you can hit the links at the bottom of this podcast wherever you're taking it in. You can go right there. You've got the code already entered for you. You can deposit, get your money matched, and start drafting. I promise that it's fun. Even if you don't win anything this week, it's a fun way to play, and it'll give you something different to do this weekend. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.